So welcome to my Fountain Pens 201 series, which is how to be extra with fountain pens. This is the 201 because there are 1.5 million Fountain Pen 101 videos. So we're taking the next step and we're being extra because I am very, very extra, as my wife can attest to, with how I deal with my fountain pens and use my fountain pens. We are joined for part of this series at least, by my wife, who's off screen. You cannot see her. Yeah, see, there's her hand. Yeah, that's the intro. So we're gonna start out with some very bare bones basics. And for my bare bones basics, I have a couple fountain pens that I'm gonna actually trot out for a hot second and show you guys. So there's a couple different types of pens in this world. There's a few different types of pens, but predominantly they boil down to three main types, three main filling types. You have your cartridge converter pens, which are like your a lot of Asian pens are cartridge converter. I say Asian pens. A lot of Japanese pens are cartridge converter pens. Like your Pilot. This is the Pilot Explorer right here, actually. So the Pilot Explorer is a cartridge converter pen. So if I unscrew this, that means that the ink is in either a cartridge or a cartridge converter, and they plug in, and that's how you use your pen. Lamy, Safari, and All-Star is a really great. These are also cartridge converters. Here you can see actually an empty cartridge, which we will get to in a minute. This is the All-Star, which is the metal body. This is the Safari, which is the plastic body. That's the big difference between the main difference between the Safari and the All-Star. The other thing is the All-Star is a little bit bigger than the Safari. But yeah, so that's your cartridge converters. Next, you have your piston fillers. So these are like your TWSBI Ecos. So this is a TWSBI Eco. This is a piston, which I realize now it doesn't help if I don't have a. There we go. So it's a piston filler pen, which means the whole body basically serves the same purpose as your cartridge converter or your cartridge. So you twist this little end, and you can then dip your pen in ink and you fill it up. So the same mechanism that works for a cartridge converter is basically the whole body of a piston filler pen. And then finally, last but not least, you have one of my. I've been loving these more and more, actually, the more I use them. And that's your vac filler pens. So this is a vac filler. This is actually another TWSBI. So the way this works is, in order to fill this pen, you unscrew and pull this plunger back, vacating this, and then you dip this in ink and you push this plunger down. What that does is there's a one-way valve here, and by pulling up, it evacuates the air. Then by pushing down, it pushes the remaining air that's in front of this piston out, and it creates a vacuum behind it. And so when you finally hit, there's a certain point you hit. This is actually super lubricated. There's a certain point right about here where you can actually see the hold on, let me see if I can. So if I let go of that, you can see the plunger pull itself back. That's the vacuum. But if I go all the way, that basically breaks the vacuum, and whatever's here in this front section gets sucked up into this pen. So that's how vac fillers work, which I think is just super cool. Vacuums are awesome. So yeah, this is the VAC 700R. This is Iris. Yeah, a cool pen. But those are basically the three main types of pens, of fountain pens that you will find. Now there's a lot of things that are different between different pens. For example, this is a Lamy 2000, and the Lamy 2000 is also a piston filler, but it has a pull cap. So it has just it doesn't have a twist cap. It's press and it's a press on cap, I guess. But other than that, a lot of fountain pens they boil down to a lot of the same things. Some have twist caps, some have pull caps, but they have a lot of the same parts. So the key parts to know is your filling method. So that's going to be located within the barrel or the body of your pen. So that's this main part here. This section right here, this is the grip section. That's where you typically will hold your pen. Some pens have, like, again, the Lamy 2000 is similar. Your grip and your body are kind of integrated. Then you have your feed. That's the plastic bit down here. Then you have your nib. That's the metal part. That's the part that will contact the paper. So you have your nib and your feed. And then at the tip of your nib, you have the tip. Usually it has some tipping material. Actually, let me find a better pen to show you that with. Here we go. This guy has some. This is a broad nib, so it's gonna have some pretty epic. You can see that tipping material up there. That basically like the ball at the top of the nib there. That's the tipping material. Then at the top you have the finial, or this is I think the cap is the finial, and then the back end is the back end. So the cap top is called the finial. I guess this end is also called the finial. But that's basically your fountain pen anatomy. There are also different types of pens, so or special parts of pens, I should say. So the Lamy Safari and the All-Star have what's called an ink window. That's this little cutout here, where you can actually, by tipping your pen back and forth, you can see how much ink is in your pen. The Lamy 2000 also has that right there, an integrated ink window there. So that's an ink window. Some pens don't have that ink window. One of the pens that comes to mind that doesn't have an ink window is actually this. This is a Pelican 405 or M405. This is also a piston filler, but no ink window. You kind of just write until it doesn't write anymore. But on the flip side of no ink window is your clear body, like the TWSBI Eco. Your clear body. These are called demonstrator pens. So these are fountain pens that you can see all of the ink that's in them. They're what's referred to as demonstrators. There's actually a special variant of the Lamy Safari called the Lamy Vista, which I do have, actually. Let me grab the Vista. That is actually a demonstrator with a cartridge converter. Now cartridge converters come in all sorts of different types, and we'll talk about that in a second. But this is the Lamy Vista. And as you can see all the way. I actually keep the I try to keep the cardboard rings that come with my Lamys. so when they're not in use, they can be... But as you can see with my Vista here, you can see exactly how much ink is in here, and you can completely see all of the inside. So this is a demonstrator pen because you can completely see through this pen. Another pen like that is actually the Platinum Preppy. So that's like the bare bones basics about just pens. About the pens themselves. Let's talk the cartridge converters. So cartridge converters is where things get a little bit interesting because there's a couple different types of cartridge converters out there that have a couple different mechanisms of cartridge converting. So let me show you them all. So first we have what I would say is like probably the most common, and that is, sorry, there we go. So this is a Lamy converter, but it has, basically this is a smaller piston. So this is a piston converter, and it's basically that same piston mechanism that we see in the TWSBI Eco or a piston pen, but just a lot smaller. So you have this little twisty guy, and fill that guy with ink, you push it in, and then it acts like a cartridge. So that's a piston. Then you have these pull style ones, like the Kaweco mini converters here. So this is a Kaweco mini converter, and it's just push pull. It's just push pull. So no twisting, you just push or pull it. And then you have what are perhaps my least favorite, but they're the most old school, if you will, type of cartridge converter, and that's the sack converter. So this is a elastic sack, a rubber sack that you squeeze and then you let go of to fill with ink. I like these the least. This one is actually a Pilot converter here, but other brands have them too. I like these the least, just because it's rubber and, you know, you can't see through it. So I can't see how much ink is here. I think you also get the worst fill in this style of converter. So that's converters. You know, nice and easy. Yeah. So that's pen converters. And let's, I guess the last recap thing is filling your pen. And I think that's where we actually start the first of our 201 style, our advanced how to be extra material. Normally when filling a fountain pen, and I'll actually just use some distilled water here, is what I will use. I'm totally prepared. Okay. This is perfect for what I need. So this is a little thing I got in a Nixie box, which are these like little dip pen vial holders. So yeah, or dip pen ink holders. This will do perfectly for my purpose. And actually, I could actually use something else that would also be equally useful, which is this Ink Miser. The Ink Miser Ink Shot. But, you know, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, and I'm showing you how to be extra. Here. Okay. Here we go. So, this is what a ink sample vial typically is. These are typically, you see these a lot in like a lab setting. So if you're familiar with them, you'd see it. You might be familiar of these things from a lab setting, but these are what people typically share samples of ink with. I have a lot. I have a lot of samples. Okay. But this is because I also prefer to use my ink from a sample vial so that I don't contaminate my actual ink bottle. Like I said, extra. So, let's fill this guy up and I'll show you how normally you're supposed to fill a pen. So, okay. I'm just using some distilled water, which is clear and you can't see anything, so it'll be great. I'm also going to borrow one of my nifty little this guy, which is a little sample ink vial holder, just to make things a little more stable because I don't want to spill. I mean, it's just water, but I don't want to spill. So if I'm filling a piston filler, unscrew it, you unscrew this guy, and step one is you twist the piston so that it's in its low position. You submerge your pen beyond. So typically what you're looking for is the filler hole. Most pens will have that right at the base of the grip and the feed. You submerge, and then you're going to twist this up basically the opposite direction that you used, and you get a fill. So that's how you fill a piston, and that's how you would fill also a cartridge converter as well. Except the cartridge converter, that's how you fill a piston. Just gonna here. We can do the same with the cartridge converter. So I'll actually show you with my, this is a Kaweco Sport. So this is actually what's considered a pocket pen because it's shorter than your typical pen. Got to introduce this in the pen types. But when you post the pen, so putting the cap on the back of the pen is called posting. When you post this pen, it becomes basically a full-size pen. So, great example. So, what we're going to do, same thing. We submerge past that fill point, and then we're going to, in this case, pull the plunger, and we could see the water came right into there and filled. And that's how you would fill a cartridge converter. All right. And then once you have the ink in here, you put your the body back on, and you're good to start writing. And last but not least, you have your vac filler, which in this case we're using again this TWSBI VAC 700. Now unscrew this guy, and you pull all the way back. This is what you do before you get it in the ink. And what I like to do, especially if I'm using an ink vial to fill this ink, is I'm going to actually push down on this plunger until I'm right about at that point where it's going to expand. Right, so I've expelled basically as much air as possible, and then I'm going to submerge it, and then I'll press it the rest of the way. And as you can see, I got a little bit of ink. A little bit of ink. To fill this further, you pull it back up, and you do the same thing. So now I'm going to actually put it here. So, because it's pushing all that ink back out, right? I get to that point again. Now I'm going to submerge. And on my second fill, I've filled further. The reason that that happens is because your grip, your feed, actually is taking in some of that ink. So when I purge the ink from the body of this pen, even though I go all the way, you can see I have now all of these water droplets in here. That's from just the feed, and there's still ink in there. So that's how that works. you're basically hydrating your feed. So if you wanted to get a more complete fill on, say, a piston filler or your cartridge, right? Your cartridge converter. So I've dipped this in, or hold on. Down position, dip in, fill. Right, so I would just invert it and very, very carefully see, and it's gonna bubble up a little bit because you're pushing out all of the ink that's in the feed. But you invert it, push it up carefully, and then you're gonna put your pen back in your ink and you're gonna suck it back up. And that gives you your complete fill because you've evacuated that extra water. Or sorry, you've evacuated that extra air. Purging. Yep, there we go. All right. So there you have it. That is the fountain pen basics review. Yeah. That's the fountain pen side. But fountain pens are basically just one part of a larger triangle. Because you have your pen, you've got your paper, and you've got the ink. So next up, we're going to talk inks. Actually have a mini tray of inks that I'm going to bring out here. So ink comes in a couple different fashions. You can get bottled ink, obviously, of which I have, this is a Waterman bottle. They come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. You can get, like this is a diamine ink right here. This is, I think, a 30 mil, or I think it's a 30 mil bottle. And you can also get cartridges, which we have some ink cartridges around somewhere. My tray of stuff. So that's that is an ink cartridge there. So ink comes pre-filled. You can buy it right off the counter and not have to worry about needing to fill your pen if you just want to swap out the but in talking about inks come with a lot of different properties, and if you've been following my ink swatching series, you'll have seen a lot of these different properties. Oh, inks also come in samples. Some places will allow you to buy samples of ink. But inks can come with several different properties. So, some inks, the most common property you'll see is shading. One of the best examples of shading I have is right here with this Colorverse Intense Magnetic Fuel. You can see like a light pass gives you one shade, but a darker pass, a wetter swatch gives you a darker shade. This can be accomplished by one of the properties of fountain pens, which is a wetter fountain pen, which means they write more wet, which means more ink goes through the fountain pen as you write. A wetter fountain pen will provide this darker color, whereas a drier fountain pen will provide this lighter color. That can change how you decide to write. And the other thing is, as you write, you might also get your letters basically having a lighter top half and a darker bottom half, or vice versa, just as the ink pools as you're writing. So that's called shading. You can see some of these inks. Blue Moon actually has some shading here. It's kind of a little harder to tell on the swatches that are done on the Maple Leaves. This is a really good one. Portuguese Meteor has a lot of shading. This is a high shading one, so you can really tell the difference between the two. And you can even see it a little bit in Dante's Cosmetology. Or Cosmology. Then there's another property called dual shading. So if you take shading a bit further, you get dual shading. There's a handful of inks that really show off this property. And not a handful, there's more and more inks, but some of the most famous examples of this property are actually by Sailor Ink Studio, or Sailor Ink, who does Sailor Ink Studio. They do the Sailor Mano series. One of the best examples I have is Sailor Ink Studio 224. You can see this swatch. This is a blue ink, and yet in this blue you can see purple and green as well in the shading. You can see that also here in Sailor Ink Studio 150. 123 has some. One of the most famous Sailor Ink Studios to have this property is actually Sailor Mano Haha, which this swatch does not do it justice. But that's shading. So that's shading, and Sailor Mano Neko Yanagi also shows it pretty well here, as this is a purple ink, but you can see like light blue and even pale purple in there. Sailor Mano Nadeshiko has a little bit as well. So there's a lot of these inks. The Sailor inks that I have are just like the best, like the prime example that pops out. Van Diemen's also does it. These are just some examples. Like I said, not a definitive list for this property. So Van Diemen, you can see that in Last Light and Pas de Deux. You can see like the purple and the blue and a little bit of green kind of all mixed into both of these swatches. And these are, these are different. The next property I'll actually talk about because it's on this page. It's shimmer. Shimmer is basically little bits of like mica or glitter mixed into your ink. It's very similar to like the mica in resins. And it gives a little bit of glitteriness. Iron Gall is another great. So Van Diemen's has shimmer. Pretty much every company who makes inks has some that have, I don't know if you can see it in the Young King. The Young King has some, and also I actually just swatched it earlier today, but Iron Gall Queen of Hearts actually has some good shimmer in there. The dark red with some gold shimmer. But they're not the only ones to have it. Colorverse has a bunch of shimmer inks. Diamine has a bunch of shimmer inks. Diatramentis. Sailor, I think, does as well. I'm not entirely positive, but like a lot of people have shimmer inks. Here you can see a little bit of the shimmer in the Colorverse Milky Way there. So shimmer is that glitteriness. And finally, the last property, or the last main property, these are like the main properties. Last property is sheen. So sheen is situations, you can actually, I'll pull this out to show a little better. So Colorverse Bow Shock is one that actually has some sheen there. And you can see as I move, as the light hits this, the places where the ink is more dense, or was more, as opposed to shading, where it's going to be like two shades of a similar color, or like a more saturated of two different of the same color. Sheen is an entirely different color that kind of is like very reflective. One of the best examples of this is Birmingham Pen Company's Tesla coil, which, like, as the light hits this, you can see that like very bright pink that's coming off of it. Yeah, that's the sheen. So that's sheen. Another property I should talk about, it's a little bit less common, is water fastness or permanence, water resistance. Some inks are just naturally water resistant, some are less water resistant, just based on the dyes used. But some inks are intentionally water resistant. And one of the best examples of that I have, first off, Lamy Blue Black is a water resistant ink. And, oh, apparently it's in the back of this one. Oh, here's my, so Diatramentus would be here. So the Diatramentus document series is perhaps one of the best examples I have of that. These are document inks, so they are pH neutral. They are meant to outlast time, essentially. These are inks that you could put on a legal document and they cannot be tampered with, essentially. That's the point of the document inks. There are permanent inks. Platinum has their carbon black. Typically, the permanent inks are pigments, which is why they're permanent. Another series that has recently come out is the Diamine Forever inks. I don't know that they're document certified, but they are waterproof. And also, I think it's in this one. Octopus Fluids has certified document inks as well. They also have a Write and Draw series, which is a permanent inks, which are permanent inks, but those are primarily for art and are not necessarily document tested. So look for that certified document if you are interested in using it. Like if you need it to be permanent and tamper-proof, that's what you're going to want to look for. Like those are guaranteed, basically. Different inks, just like pens, have different properties as well, in the sense of like I call it like the hidden property, which is wet or dry. So actually, the Diatramentus document inks are a great example of this. So you can see here, like document black, document violet, they're like the letters that I write, and I've written all of these with basically the same pen. So you can see here, very thin, very fine, but you can see here document turquoise is spread. Oh, maybe you can't. But document turquoise has spread a little bit. And even document cyan has spread a lot, and dark blue. So that is what's called a wet ink. So wet ink basically has a so to get all scientific with this, it basically flows faster and flows more readily. So it has a lower tension, a lower water tension, and it will soak in and it will spread on your paper. So if you're using like a cheap paper, you're going to want to stay away from some of these wetter inks, because that's where you're going to get things like feathering in your ink. And then paper. The last part of the writing trinity is paper. What I've found is the quality of paper can be varied no matter the source. A lot of people will tell you that copy paper is like printer paper is just cheap printer paper, and I've found that the quality of printer paper varies. I've written on printer paper with fountain pens and had no issue, and I've written on other printer papers that have a lot of issues. So it's really dealer's choice. One of my favorite brands, probably my most commonly used brand, is Leuchtturm. Leuchtturm notebooks I use a lot of. This is actually my Hell's Kitchen log here. I have a notebook of my predictions and kind of the events that transpired in every episode of every episode of Hell's Kitchen. Oh, this is actually really good. This is a high sheening ink. You can see, you can actually see right there. I use Leuchtturm as like my basis to judge how good of paper is. So what you can tell here is Leuchtturm paper has a little bit of ghosting. So ghosting is where you can see your writing through the paper. So I can see, so if I lift this page up and I'm just looking at this page, there's a little bit of ghosting. You see it more when the pages are stacked against each other like that. You can see kind of through it. But you don't have, like, typically, I don't end up dealing with any soaking through, like any show through, any bleed. So bleed is when, and you can really tell, especially where I have these filled in squares, they're not bleeding through, as in the ink is basically not showing on the other side of the page like it would on this side of the page. A good example of bleed is when you're writing on paper with a Sharpie, it will bleed through. So something underneath could get Sharpie on it when you're writing on it. A solution to paper that has that problem is using plotter underneath. But again, that's being extra, and you can use blotter, or you can be cheap and cut up some construction paper, because you know what construction paper is good for? Being absorbent paper. I find construction paper to be the crappiest paper to write on fountain pens with, but because it's just so absorbent. But the qualities that make it the worst paper to write on fountain pens with make it some of the best paper to make blotter paper out of. Because the point of blotter paper is to be so absorbent that it protects everything else. So, blotter paper, construction paper. If you're going to be extra like I am, if you get a corner trimmer, you can trim your sharp 90-degree corners into these beautiful rounded corners. There we go, rounded corners, so that they don't get all frayed and gross. And you can just get a basic paper punch. Basic punch. Like so. To do that. They also, if you're a fan of Battlestar Galactica, actually make a flat, like a bevel. Okay, bevel. And you can just have your flat cornered paper, and you can turn your paper into pretend you're on Battlestar Galactica. They're hexagonal papers. What I've found is the worst paper in notebooks is moleskin paper for fountain pens. Because some moleskins are fine, some moleskins are crap. So I tend to stay away from moleskin. And that's pretty much the only brand that I know of that I avoid, actually. This is gonna sound amazing. You don't need to spend a lot of money on paper, is what I'm saying. Because some of actually the best paper I've ever used is from a cheap Mead composition notebook. Also, Target's Up and Up brand has some composition books. I've used those. Those are also amazing. So you don't need to go out and spend, $10, $20 on a notebook. You can spend $3 on a notebook, and it's perfect for fountain pens, and you're still being extra. If you want to be extra. And yeah, I think that's the basics. I think I've covered the basics. Do you have any... This is our rehashing the 101. So do you have any questions that are basics? Just the basics. Okay, I like that.
Basically is why do
Sure.
like out there? involved. Tell them how.
Okay, yeah. Good questions. Hold on one second. I need to make sure, because it occurs to me that I was not watching to make sure you were picked up. Can you ask part of that again?
What is the appeal of fountain
Okay.
pens?
So the appeal of a fountain pen versus a ballpoint pen. So ballpoint pens are, in my opinion, limited. So yeah, I know that sounds amazing because you're like, but ballpoint pens come in so many like sizes and everything. So I'll partially answer this question by also talking about a little bit about my journey to fountain pens. And that is part of what led me to fountain pens is the search for a super fine tip because I write very small. Now, conversely, I know people who write very, very big who want something to be able to write with. And the offerings for big and also the offerings for small are a lot harder to find. Sure, you can go and find a Pilot G2, but typically Pilot G2s and other similar pens, like the main range of ballpoint pens on the market are 0.5, 0.7. If you want something more than a 0.5 or a 0.7, you have to try a little bit harder to find those. Now, of course, fine liners then came out, and you have things like the pigment liners, and like these are Stadler pigment liners that I have, like that come in different sizes. But then what you sacrifice is color. So for example, if I want to write super, super, super fine, I can find a Pilot G2 that is a 0.3. I can find a Uniball that is 0.27, I think Uniball goes down to. I actually have a Signo, yeah, 0.28, right? So this is a Uniball Signo that is a 0.28. This is ultra extra fine. But my colors are limited. My colors are, here are your 4 colors in this size. Here are your 2 colors in this size, typically black and blue. Sometimes black and red. If you're very lucky, you'll get a green, but typically it's black, blue, red, and green are your main, or outside your 0.7. I think even 0.5 you can only find, like the Pilot G2s and 0.5 are only in those. So if I want, so for me, I wanted something that was extra fine, ultra extra fine even, and if I wanted to write in something that wasn't that exact shade of blue or black, I was stuck. Fountain pens allows more diversity in colors. You can almost pick exactly the shade of color you, which actually I was reading a Reddit post from a teacher who would send home notes and do notes on, like, he would send home notes to parents that he would sign with a fountain pen, and he kept the specific ink in an unmarked bottle so he could refill it at school if he needed to. Well, that's exactly it. He can say, for this school year, I've been using X color. Here is that color. So that you have this signature and not this color means, like, this color doesn't match exactly. It's not my signature. Right?
You made a good point. Document. How do I document? I am but important. I'm scared to use, even if it's lacking. I don't know what document.
So, if you're filling out documents that are important, a couple things, because I've written checks in Fountain. So,
And they've gone through.
And they've gone through. There's no issues. So there's a couple things to keep in mind. I actually signed our mortgage with a fountain pen. I did not use that, actually. So the difference between normal ink and document ink. So let's start there. So a normal fountain pen ink, under regular circumstances, will last. So a normal, I actually forgot about one type of ink. I will get back to that. So a normal fountain pen ink will last, which is why I was okay using sign those papers, because I'm not expecting those papers to be exposed to water. I'm not expecting those papers to be exposed to sunlight for all eternity.
That's the document.
No. So fading is part of it. The ink that I used is also the ink that I used to sign on mortgage and our title and stuff is also pH neutral. Like, I made sure that the ink was actually. But
is it labeled?
so okay, so that's the great thing. So there is actually a very specific ISO standard for document ink. In order to call yourself a document ink, you have to meet a certain standard. Is I actually have a bottle that has the ISO standard on. So a bottle, you will know a ink is a document ink if it says document ink on it.
Yes.
In order, it has to. So if it meets a certain certification, it will say document ink, because that is a very specific thing.
Like a number.
Correct. Like
That's my
pencils say HB, number 2, whatever your ink or your lead is, it will say on the pencil, because so in the same way, so for this bottle of document ink, okay, so this bottle of document ink says document ink, which means it is certified to have met the ISO certification for document ink. Earlier I showed a swatch, and there's a swatch on my channel, in my videos, of a octopus inks that's a certified document. I was hoping to. No. Can't be that easy. Yeah, but it will say. So most inks, under normal conditions, are fine to sign documents in, because otherwise, what is the point of the ink existing in the, right? Like, if you can't use them for.
People use it for fun.
No, but I mean, like, the purpose. Fountain pens existed before ballpoint and rollerball pens.
Right.
Ballpoint and rollerball pens were an improvement upon the fountain. But fountain pens continue to persist because, they're ubiquitous. They can be used for everything. Fountain pens would have a harder time surviving if they couldn't be used for normal documents, right? Yeah. So normal fountain pen ink is designed to satisfy that well, right? So that's why I had no problem signing those things with normal fountain pen ink, because it's for that. Now, I wouldn't have signed it with like a shimmer ink or a high sheening ink.
The next question is that is any shimmer document
so
safe?
I have not seen a shimmer that is document safe or certified document ink. That doesn't mean it's not out there. I just haven't seen one. But I did forget about one property of ink, and that's Iron Gall ink. So this is KWZ's Iron Gall Blue Black. An Iron Gall ink is a document ink. It is, or at least it's a waterproof ink, and it is typically permanent. It is waterproof. It's typically permanent. Some of them change color, funnily enough, over time. Like, some of them turn more black, some of them turn more silver, because there's actually iron in the ink. That's the whole point of Iron Gall. So Iron Gall ink is another type of permanent ink, and actually, original fountain pen ink, original ink used in fountain pens was Iron Gall, because that was actually a key component of inks historically. So that's some little interesting now there's like different colors of Iron Gall inks because you can mess with it and mix other pigments into there. But typically that's yeah.
Started.
Oh, you might have to. I don't know that all of your questions got captured. I should have put you. You know what I should have done? I should have put you on the wireless mic. That's what I should.
When you're cleaning it, that's that not the
Sure.
get all of, but
Okay, so I'll just restate your question because I don't think my mic picked it. Here, you might have to. No, the board is fine. There, yeah, you're still off camera, so you're still good. Okay, so cleaning tips. Yes. Filling tip. Okay. Yes, sorry. Filling tips. So what I like to do is I like to put my ink. So even if I have a bottle of an ink, I like to put it in a sample vial. So actually a lot of these samples that I have, I have the actual bottle of. So some of these are just samples. Some of them I actually have the bottle of. But just to prevent like a whole bottle from tipping over or spilling, I portion them into the sample vials.
Right.
Because 5 mils, spilling 5 mils of a ink is not a big deal. Spilling 50 mils of an ink, kind of a big deal, right? So this is that Diatramentis Document Fog Gray that I just pulled that bottle out for. So here is the little sample vial for it, and I will fill my pens from here. And I have a couple different ways of filling my pens that prevents me from spilling. But that's for episode. We'll get into filling methods.
I know we discussed signing documents with fountain pen, but some people might want like what if you don't know what to write fountain pen, would you suggest writing or drawing for people?
So journaling is a big one that I've seen. If you're somebody who takes notes at work, I would absolutely use your fountain pen to take notes at work. There's no reason that you shouldn't. There's no reason that you shouldn't use those. Shouldn't use your fountain pens to take your notes for work. I actually have a running journal. I every 3 to 4 months I actually fill an entire journal with meeting notes. And I run through notebooks and ink like that. And I use different colors actually, so that I can having the variety of colors is really useful because I can, my header can be one color. My personal thoughts can be a different color. The going on was being discussed is yet another color. A certain department or group's input is another color. I can basically color code my notes. I can also highlight afterwards if I need to like go back to something, but also using a different color. Like say I'm in my one-on-one with my boss and we're discussing different things and he's like, okay, I need your tasks to be this, I need you to get this done, I need you to get that done. I can put that in a different color, and when I go back and look at my notes, I can say I need to get these 3 things done because here they are in this other color, and so my eyes are immediately drawn to it. Another thing is I've seen a lot of people basically I think the common term, even though it's wrong, is commonplace journal. which is they take quotes and it becomes a quote journal. They put quotes and they use their fountain pen for that. Another thing I've seen is reading notes. Basically, anytime you're taking notes, use the pen and paper, especially if you want to remember what you're taking notes on and be a little bit more. I find that writing helps me be more actively engaged and be more intentional. Another thing I've seen is people will transcribe out books that are meaningful to them just to practice their handwriting and just to write with their pens. I've actually done that with I've transcribed out a couple books, and I'm currently working on Lord Brocktree by Brian Jacques as I slowly work my way through his entire works in chronological, not published order. And then any other basic review of 101.
Got a pen. Die.
So the question was nib sizing, which is a great review topic. So nibs go from anywhere from, standard nibs go anywhere from ultra extra fine to double broad or stubs. Actually, some companies do have stubs. So that's like the general spread of nibs. Some companies make nibs that are interchangeable. Several companies use the same nib manufacturer, where you can actually change nibs between those brands plural of pens. Some of my favorite pens these are within the same brand, but some of my favorite nibs actually are my Lamy nibs, because this is actually a Lamy Gold nib. This is actually a Lamy Gold nib, not the Lamy Standard nib. This is a Lamy Gold nib, but I was able to just swap it out. This is one of the Lamy Standard nibs right there. But I'm able to just swap out nibs on my Lamys, Safaris, and All-Stars. So if I get a pen that is a Lamy, basically all but the Lamy 2000 are the same. So if I get a Lamy and the nib is like what I want, and it's perfect, and I get another pen and the nib is not perfect and it's the same size, I can just take that nib and just move it with whatever pen body. Really nice. The other thing of note, which I actually had to note, if I looked at my general outline, because like I said, this is largely unscripted for episode 1 and onward. What I forgot to mention is the different types of nibs, Western versus Eastern nibs. So something of note is that Japanese nibs are about a nib size smaller than Western nibs. So my Pilot extra fine here, this is an extra fine, and this is a Lamy extra fine. This Lamy extra fine is actually writes broader than this Pilot fine, extra fine. A Pilot fine would be about equivalent to my Lamy extra, or my any other Western nib extra, basically. And the same is true for like Sailor, Platinum. The extra fines there are on par with a Western, and that's because these like Japanese nibs, these Chinese nibs, are a lot of times designed for those characters, which are more intricate than Western, and so they require that finer. That said, they do go up to the double broad, like they get big and juicy. I personally lean super fine. I like my needlepoint grinds. That's a specialty grind, which is equivalent to like an ultra extra fine. Like my 0.28, this Uniball Signo 0.28, I can basically get in a fountain. Very easy. My notes on ink, actually, another thing that I missed and forgot to mention was some inks you can actually mix. So back to that story with the professor, the teacher who liked to sign fountain pens. One of the things he also did was that unmarked bottle wasn't just a raw bottle of ink. He would mix. And usually he would mix within a brand. So when you get to ink mixing, things can be a little bit hinky. Certain brands, you can mix the ink with no issues. Certain brands is hit or miss, because you could get a precipitate that forms in the ink. My advice is, if you're planning on mixing inks, don't use a fountain pen that you care a lot about when you use that ink. And most certainly, let that ink sit for at least a week to see if any precipitate forms. Because that's a big deal. The inks that I have mixed Jacques Urban inks together, different Jacques Urban inks together, and I have mixed different Waterman inks together. I have not crossed the brands, but those separately I have mixed of themselves. From what I hear, the Diatramentus document inks you can also mix with each other, but you should not mix other inks. Your question. Okay, so that is fountain pens. Fountain pen 201. Reviewing the basics. So if you check your syllabus, this is the first. We have reviewed what you would expect in your 101 class, and we will be moving on to new material and being extra in episode